Welcome to this lecture on liberal humanism, our second philosophy of education. One of the main ideas of liberal humanism has to do with its purpose. Let me stop here and make a point about purpose. In all the philosophies of education, purpose is very basic. It's the basic premise upon which the philosophy is developed. That is, the goals, objectives, curriculum, pedagogy, all logically follow from the purpose, the conceived purpose of the philosophy. So, purpose is the driving force of any philosophy of education, and in turn the purpose of an education can be viewed and is connected to the larger social purposes of the society within which education is situated. So educational purpose and social purpose are interconnected, and they both drive everything else in the conception of education. From a liberal humanist point of view, the main purpose, the central purpose of education is the liberation of the internal powers or capabilities that make us human and that are necessary to live a life of human dignity, which we could conceive as a good life. And this liberation should be the primary purpose of education. Thus, liberal humanism is conceived to be about the liberation of the powers of the mind, heart, soul, consciousness of the human being that enables a human being to live a good life. The purpose is liberation of our innate powers. Liberal humanism has its origins in the philosophy of Aristotle in the ancient Greek world. Aristotle's basic argument is that his logical deduction is that all action and knowledge aim at some good. That is what we seek. We always seek some good. And that there are intrinsic goods, that is goods, things that are good in themselves, and there are intrinsic goods, that is things that are good as a means to the achievement of ends, or a means to the achievement of intrinsic goods. There has to be some kind of intrinsic good that we're seeking, and this is what Aristotle attempts to uncover. He's seeking in his philosophy something that's intrinsically good as the fundamental premise of a choice of a way of life and a fundamental premise about the purpose of education. And this intrinsic good must be final and self-sufficient. If something isn't intrinsically good, if there are no intrinsic goods, then we're caught. If everything is an instrumental good, that is a means to an end, then we're caught in an infinite regress. That is, one good becomes the means to another good, which becomes the means to the other good, which becomes the means to another good ad infinitum. And this is logically unsatisfactory. Aristotle argues that there's a general opinion that the intrinsic good that we seek as human beings is happiness. The Greek word was eudaimonia, and eudaimonia is often translated as happiness, but a better translation is either human flourishing, living well and doing well, or human well-being. And human well-being is grounded in human functioning, human activity, And in turn, it's grounded in innate powers, in particular, practical reason and sociability. So from Aristotle's point of view, it is the liberation of the capacity of reason and the capacity to engage in relationship with others, which leads to happiness or human flourishing, which is the end that we seek. And therefore, education in the service of human flourishing is a process. Its purpose should be the liberation of the mind, the liberation of our fundamental innate powers. This Aristotelian argument we find informing Martha Nussbaum's conception of the purpose of education in terms of her three goals, being critical thinking and reflection, the liberation of the student's mind from mere habit and tradition, that students develop the capacity for critical analysis, dialogue, argumentation, active participation, that they gain the capacity for self-reflection. Also, that students become citizens of the world. That is, they not only identify themselves with their local region or group or even nation, but that their identification extends to all human beings. And this requires a broad, complex knowledge and understanding of the world. Thirdly, Nussbaum argues that a fundamental educational goal is the development of sympathy and imaginative understanding, that we develop in our students empathy and compassion. That is, the capacity to respond to other persons with care and compassion and understanding. Jacques Maritain, in his beautiful overview of liberal education, states is firmly in the liberal humanist tradition, and as evidenced by a number of statements he makes in his essay. For example, that the education of man is a human awakening, that the prime good of education is the conquest of internal and spiritual freedom to be achieved by the individual person, his liberation through knowledge and wisdom, goodwill and love. An education that broadens and liberates the mind, liberates the powers of thinking, enlightens and strengthens the reason. He maintains that there's a vital and active principle of knowledge that's innate in each human being, which he conceives as the inner seeing power of intelligence. And it is that vital principle, that inner power, which should be developed and liberated in the individual through the process of education. That we awaken. Education should be an awakening to the full range of our internal powers. Mortimer Adler, in his essay, The Paideia Proposal, suggests at least a part of education, at the core of education, is the objective of personal growth. And we should strive to make as much of our powers as we can. And that this is a lifelong process of unfoldment, and that education is a lifelong process of personal growth. And that schooling, or a formal educational process, is to prepare human beings to undergo this lifelong learning, which then equips us to be good citizens, prepares us to be good citizens, and prepares us to participate gamefully in economic activity. So we have the fundamental purpose of liberal humanism, a liberal humanist education, as the liberation of our innate powers and capabilities that allow us to live a full human life, a good life, a life of dignity. From the perspective of liberal humanism, human capital theory, and the purpose of education as economic growth is too narrow. The argument is that tying education either exclusively or primarily to economic growth neglects those inner powers that makes us human, or the full range of them, and limits the human being to an economic being, a worker, an economic producer, rather than a full holistic human being. Wealth, from this perspective, is instrumental. It's a means, not an end. Wealth in itself, it does not have intrinsic value. It's always a means rather than an end. And human capital theory makes the mistake of treating wealth as an end rather than a means, and therefore distorts and narrows the purposes of education. This from the point of view of liberal humanism. So, for example, Nussbaum states at the beginning of our book, in response to the growing dominance of human capital theory and education for economic growth, she writes, "We are pursuing the possessions that protect, please, and comfort us, what Tagore called our material covering. What we seem to be forgetting about the soul, about what it is for thought to be open out of the soul and connect person to world in a rich, subtle, and complicated manner, about what it is to approach another person as a soul rather than as a mere useful instrument, about what it is to talk as someone who has a soul to someone else whom one sees as similarly deep and complex." End quote. That is, human capital theory and education driven exclusively or primarily by economic growth, economic development, narrows the vision of human life. Maritain maintains that the democratic way of life demands primarily liberal education for all and a general humanistic development throughout society. At the end of the book, he asks, and he's writing this in the very midst of World War II, perhaps at its darkest hour. He asks, what are we fighting for? And he states, if we in the youth will be educated by future democracies, hold everything that is not calculable or workable to be only a matter of myth, and believe only in a technocratic world, then we can indeed conquer Nazi Germany, militarily and technically, but we ourselves shall have been conquered morally by Nazi Germany. For the preface to fascism and Nazism is a thorough disregard of the spiritual dignity of man, and the assumption that merely material or biological standards rule human life and morality. End quote. Here, in liberal humanist fashion, Maritain is rejecting the narrowing of our vision of life to materialism and biological destiny, which robs us of the inner core of who we really are and robs us of our dignity. And therefore education must be based, the purpose of education must be based on the liberation of our internal capability the internal capability that makes us human, in order for us to live a life of dignity. Based upon this liberal humanist purpose of liberation, a particular conception of the curriculum is derived. The curriculum, from this perspective, consists of a deep and broad understanding of disciplines of knowledge, that is, the core disciplines of human knowledge, and the greatest achievements of human culture. For example, Maritain argues or concludes that the curriculum be focused on the articulated comprehension of human achievements in science and culture. Adler breaks it down into three areas as represented in the columns on page 23 of his essay: the disciplines of knowledge, intellectual skills, and then great books and works of art. Nussbaum attempts to expand the knowledge base of the curriculum to include complex global knowledge, an understanding of global interdependence and its problems, and a complex knowledge of others, a general education in not only one's own nation, but other peoples, other cultures, other religions, world history, politics, geography, economics, justice, etc., languages. That the liberal humanist curriculum be globalized in order to meet the purpose of the cultivation of world citizens. Thus, Nussbaum is arguing for the globalization of the humanist curriculum, that we do not take a narrow point of view when we look at the achievements of human culture, that the achievements of culture be not narrowed to our own culture, but include multiple cultures. Also, Nussbaum maintains that the curriculum focused on the development of imagination, imaginative understanding, and sympathy include play as a part of the curriculum, which teaches us play, as in particular in young students, teaches students to live with others without control, and connects vulnerability with curiosity and wonder. Also, the arts. The arts are extremely important for the development of imagination and sympathetic understanding. It also exposes and opens cultural blind spots. It is through the arts, through literature, through performance, through the visual arts, that imagination can be cultivated, and that the capacity for sympathy, for empathy, be developed through exposure to the arts. Our third main idea pertaining to pedagogy and liberal humanism is the pedagogy is primarily Socratic. And for Nussbaum, that stimulates students to think and argue for themselves. In the Socratic method is a method of questioning which elicits, draws out what the student knows or draws out their understanding. It's based in inquiry. It's evaluative. It asks students to evaluate the value, to assess the value of what is being learned, to analyze that value. It is active. It is experiential. And it involves self-reflection or self-examination. Not only do we develop through the Socratic method, an understanding of the subject matter, we develop a self-understanding. Maritain argues that the principal agent in education and its primary dynamic factor is, of course, the internal vital principle in the student. That is their innate powers, their power of seeing, that's based in intelligence, intuitively seeing. And that is the primary driver of an education. And the teacher, as the pedagogue, attempts to facilitate the dynamic unfolding and liberation of that vital principle. And therefore, teaching should never be conceived as a passive or mechanical transmission of information. It must be active and must cultivate understanding and the tools of understanding. This pedagogy rejects teaching as cramming of materials into a bag. Adler suggests that there are three different kinds of pedagogy consistent with the purposes of liberal humanism: didactic instruction to acquire background knowledge, coaching and practice to develop skill, and then at the core is Socratic questioning and active participation. And he concludes that all general learning is active, not passive. It involves the use of the mind, not just memory. That is, the mind is a power, rather not exclusively of absorption, but of reason and analytic reflection. It is a process of discovery in which the student is the main agent, not the teacher. He suggests nothing can ever be rightly stuffed into someone's mind. That is the very opposite of genuine teaching. So what emerges is a dynamic, question-driven, inquiry-based, active method of teaching. This method of teaching is consistent with the purpose, the fundamental purpose of liberal humanism, to liberate the powers of the mind. And the powers of the mind are liberated through inquiry, through questioning, through participation, in connection to the fundamental achievements, the greatest achievements of human culture.